Sure, absolutely. So I'm so happy to be here. It's always a pleasure to be with both of you and talk about all things procurement. And so Amanda Prochaska, I am the Chief Wonder Officer of Wonder Services. And oh, Anders, I know you smiled when I said that. That's awesome. I love my title. Didn't CEO didn't feel like it fit for me. So but we are all about change management, process improvement, and project management services. So we help deploy wonderful tools like Focal Point and many others within the ProcureTech space. And I have a passion for doing that. I've been doing it for 21 years now, which is crazy. 4.5 of those at Wonder Services previously in my corporate role. So happy to be here today and have this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Anders Lillevik. I am not a Wonder officer. I'm a founder of Focal Point. I've been running Focal Point for about 3.5 years now, and I'm a recovering chief procurement officer. So I spent 20 plus years in procurement as a practitioner. So I was a CPO for companies like Fannie Mae, QBE, Webster Bank, Citizens Bank, and I started Focal Point to deal with some of these issues we're going to talk about today. Focal Point is a B2B SaaS platform for procurement organizations to optimize and standardize their processes. And today we're going to talk about intake and what we feel about that.
I'm excited. Okay, so I got one more message that said that you couldn't access chat. Just updated one more time. It should be good this time. So if anyone does want to hop in and try to share where they're joining us from. Okay, looks like we're good now. Exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for introing yourselves. Let's jump right into it. So today we're going to be talking all things intake. We do have some pre-submitted questions for you guys to go over, but we also are going to, oh, awesome. Thanks, Madison. Yeah, just sharing she's here from Boston. And we'll start with going through these, but we'll definitely have an open Q&A session at the end. So let's get started. So question one, we're talking about what intake is and why it's so important. So let's just get a baseline from the two of you.
I'll go first. Anders is going to have a lot more to say about this one than maybe I will. So I'll go first, and you can tag on your thoughts. But I truly, like, when we're working with all of our clients, one thing that I'm seeing more often than not is this seamless interaction between procurement and the rest of the organization. With AI coming online and more user-friendly options for almost like a self-service type of a feel, where information and insights can be right at your fingertips, I think intake and procurement needs to evolve more and more into intake solutions to meet that demand. Another thing is procurement can be confusing. Like I always tell people, if I'm a salesperson and I need to buy something, I don't care that we have 15 different buying channels, and nor do I care to learn what those are. So speaking from a change management hat, having intake is so beneficial to make sure that your end users don't need to understand procurement, but they still get directed into the right places in the organization to make their purchases. So I think between those two things, it's a really important topic to have right now, and for people in procurement to be considering an intake solution.
So yeah, so I'll add to that, right? Like, so at the end of the day, like when I was in procurement as a practitioner, we would get demand coming all out of, from everywhere, right? So you would walk the hallways, you'd pick up a project. You get an email, you pick up a project. Somebody would call you back in the day when we had landlines, and you pick up a project. And it's a matter of sort of figuring out how to accumulate all this demand and then channel it in the right areas, right? And I think now that there are solutions out there where you can actually go to one spot and either get help to finalize your transaction, whether that is a traditional, I need to buy something, great, here's the catalog item, here's the rec, here's the PO, and off you go, right? Or I need some help with something. Maybe I need an invoice, or I need a copy of an invoice. Maybe I need a contract. Maybe I need something that is purely tactical, and they can do that in the same way. Like, you go one spot, you get help. You can get redirected to say, all right, I need to book travel. Great, we'll send you to that travel booking tool. Or I need to deal with a supplier. Okay, fine. Here you go for that. But more importantly, as a procurement practitioner, it's also, I need a full-blown procurement project. I need help from procurement. excuse me. And it's about making sure that people can go in one spot, figuring out what they need to do and how they can get help from procurement in one spot. And I think, as a procurement leader, I think the important thing for me is to have a better user experience for your users, being able to manage that process of taking in new projects and bouncing them up against other priorities that you may have going on, and look at things holistically across the board. And we think about that sort of like, all right, you already have stuff that you're working on right now, and then you got stuff coming in the front door, and say, all right, how do I stack these up in terms of priority? And I think that is, again, like why intake is important, because it can actually make it more visible about where you're spending your time, where you're adding value, and how are you interacting with your clients internally. So I think, again, like I think intake has been around for a long time. There are companies out there that created, it was called iRequest from Zycus when I first saw it, but it was, in my opinion, it was fairly, uni-channel. Like, yeah, anything's going to turn into a PO at some point. Well, no, that's not always the case, right? So, but intake's been around for a minute. It hasn't really taken off until 2 years ago or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that was really, really good. Anything else to add, Amanda?
No, I think we've covered it. It's always lovely to hear Anders, and such passion from Anders. I mean, that this is why you are doing what you're doing, is because of what you just said. And so I always love hearing your insights there.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good baseline because we're about to get into how intake's changed and its future. So our next question is going to be talking a little bit about common challenges faced during the intake process and how they can be mitigated, which, Anders, obviously, I know a lot of your passion lies here too. So I'm excited to let you guys take a crack at this.
Anders, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like I think as you're setting up your intake solution, like the biggest problem that I always find is that people don't necessarily know all their buying channels or know where everything is going to end up, and being able to figure out, like, how do I actually set this thing up to add the most value with the least amount of friction. And procurement is known for creating these 200 questionnaires, right? And that doesn't work anymore. So it's a matter of like, creating some brevity around, the amount of information that we collect to add the most value, and then figuring out like where do we go from here? And really, you have to put the user experience at heart, right? Like people sometimes want to go from the wild, wild west to communist China overnight, and it doesn't really work that well. So it's about deciding, where you're going to add the most value, and going after that as a key tenet.
Yeah. And I would echo that. I think a lot of the challenges are just trying to define what this looks like, right? What your process actually is, and how you want to design it into an intake tool. And really changing the game when it comes to the mindset of procurement. So often when we've designed, at least in my past, when I was designing these processes originally, it was very procurement focused. Like, what does procurement need from this process? And I think when you go into intake, it's really about that customer journey. So it's not just a process map, but it's really thinking through, how does your customer move through this process and ultimately get what they need? And along the way, you need to be thinking about, okay, what does this mean for procurement, et cetera, but really kind of flipping it over to say, I need my customer to have this really nice, simple journey into procurement to get what they need.
Awesome. All right. Thank you both. So with that, is there anything else you want to add on challenges and intake? All good? Okay.
Well, just one more. I just thought of one more. So
go for it.
I do change management, right? So the way that these roll out, obviously they should be very integrated into what people do. But if there are spots where they're not, you do have to think through, how do I get people to adopt this? And if I'm used to, like, we have a client right now that it's largely email based, and we're trying to move them into more into a system where communications can happen. So if people are used to emailing Jane because Jane's super responsive and she knows what she's doing and it's really easy to do that, and now they have to go through intake, we have to think through, what does that transition look like and how do we make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Anders, I think once you made a post that did really well talking about empathy as CEOs and empathy in procurement. And I think a lot of change management, like for you as well, Amanda, is really thinking, okay, how is this affecting my people? What is their thought process and how can we make this as easy as possible? So I think that's an important part as well, Amanda.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Question 3. The fun begins. Digital transformation and how has that impacted the procurement intake process? I think, Amanda, what you just said is a really, really good lead into this.
Yeah, yeah. And I love this question because so often we get clients that are like, we have either one core end-to-end system, but it still has its opportunities here and there, or we've gone out and we've purchased best in breed solutions, right? Part of the reason why I started Wonder Services is that I started this I started noticing this evolution within procurement and procure tech. And I started thinking about the poor end users, right? All of this procurement tech is awesome, right? And it's making a difference in our world. But if end users get confused on where to go and how to use those, they're not going to be adopted at the end of the day, and we're wasting money, and nobody wants that. So that's why I was like, we need to be thinking about this differently. How can we make sure that end users really know where they need to go? And intake is a huge part of that solve. So I'm glad to see all intake kind of taking the spotlight, because end users shouldn't need to know. I have an example of just a very simple, and this is a potential client that we're talking to, but they are on an end-to-end solution, and they just brought on a VMS solution, a vendor management solution, which is great. Like they're taking charge, and these technologies are going to really make an impact. But the question is, how do my end users know when to use the end-to-end and when to use the VMS? And so that's where intake really can help, is the end user doesn't really need to know. Intake can direct them to the right location. So I can talk about this for days. Anders, I'm sure you have some stuff to add to that.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? I kind of look at intake as just a part of the transformation of procurement technology, right? So I think at the core of it, you need to get work in the front door, and then you need to work on that work, and you need to make sure the client is updated, right? So at the end of the day, like, what we need is something that moves projects from left to right. And it could be a large project, like a full-blown RFP, or it could be a single transaction. But at the end of the day, like, you need one place to go, one place to sort of figure out where, like, how to execute, and then track the progress along the way. And I think that, intake, the word doesn't do it justice, right? Because at the end of the day, it's where the work gets done for end users, and procurement is kind of like the feet under the water for the duck, right? Like, you can only see what's floating on top of the surface, and that's what the user gets. And then behind the scenes, there's a lot of work being done that involves third parties inside the company. It could be risk, it could be legal, it could be compliance, it could be whatever. But at the end of the day, I think now that folks are starting to look at things as I go here and I put something in, and then work happens, and I get notified as that thing moves along. And I think that's why I think it's becoming so much more powerful. It's kind of where it's kind of the focal point, if you will, where people go and figure out, all right, here's the status of my project. This is where my purchase order is sitting in the queue, right? Those kinds of things. And I think having that idea that having a bunch of systems it's not enough anymore. Like, you need something that ties them together, so that you get redirected to the right place, you get the help that you need, you get the updates that you need along the way. And I think that helps procurement people think more like a service organization rather than a back office function. And I think that's where we need to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were mentioning that, I was thinking of, I wonder if everyone on the call could take a moment to think about where you get information from, right? So as a sourcing professional, as a buyer, whatever role you're playing in procurement, just take a moment to think about where you're getting all of your information from. And it's probably a little bit of email. It's probably your end-to-end system. It might be an ERP. It might be the hallway conversations. It might be other things. And so as you continue your digital transformation, there could be even more of those spots where you're getting information or you need to get status updates from. And really, intake puts a bow around all of that. So it creates this way that you can operate effectively and also offer status updates not only to yourself to make sure you're not falling behind anything, but also to your stakeholders and anyone else involved in the process. So it's really putting a bow around all of that, all of those places where you get information today, and making it more effective for you at the end of the day.
I love that. I really love
Yeah.
that. I love when you get to say the title of the movie in the movie when it comes to be focal point. And then I also love the notion that procurement is just a bunch of little ducks with their feet scooting along the river. That's really adorable. That made me smile. Okay, let's move to the next question. Question number 4. So this is getting into the nitty gritty. We've stated the problem. There's so many different places where we're getting data, both for us to manage internally and for the business user when they're trying to have their needs met. So in light of that, are there specific tools or software that you guys recommend to streamline and manage that procurement intake? How is that benefiting both procurement and the business users?
Okay. Anders, I'm sure you're going to have a really
I
question
mean, so obviously, like, the way I say this is kind of like intake is flavor of the month, right? So there's lots of tools out there that do really well. And I think and I'm not going to mention any names, including our own, but at the end of the day, right, you need to figure out, that we're procurement people, right? Start with requirements, right? What do you need this thing to do? And how do you want to do it? And what systems do they need to talk to? And what kind of information, that goes in and out of the solution? I think that ultimately is going to drive your decision about what you do. I'm a bit older, right? So for me, this whole idea of everything needs to be whiz-banged and AI driven, like, yeah, there's some value in that. But the question really is, like, what is the value, and are your user going to enjoy chatting with a bot? And I think that's, one man's opinion for what it is worth. But, there are lots of tools out there. You don't have to look particularly hard.
You just got the best compliment in the chat that Anders can't be older than 28. I'm going to point that out, Larry. Thank you for that.
Larry, never go to the eye doctor, please. No.
No, I don't think you're as old in your heart as you're very young at heart. So I was actually thinking about flipping this question a little bit on the head, because I think you covered the answer to this question. What I get is, why can't I use like something that we already have where it's intake for a different organization or part of the organization, like ServiceNow or Jira or any of those? And so it's tempting, right, to look at what you have internally for other intake processes. But I would say that just from diving into some of those solutions, they're not tailor-made really for procurement. And so I would highly recommend, if you are looking at intake, to look at your actual requirements, detail those out, and understand that you might have a quicker path to implementation and success by going through an intake tool that's built for procurement versus trying to fit something into an existing intake solution. So that's my 2 cents on this question, and kind of flipping it on its head.
And I can add to that, right? Like, yeah. we run against, we talk to organizations that have legacy tools, we'll put it that way, for intake, right? And specifically IT, they realize, like, well, you already have something, and just this is intake, so like, or this is workflow, and we use them. And like, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And at the end of the day, like, the amount of work that is needed to build integrations, to build flexible workflows, to build conditionality into some of these legacy solutions is excruciating, right? And one of our clients that is looking for an intake solution, basically for their 45,000 end users inside the organization, contacted one of the legacy providers and said, well, what will it take to do this? And, again, without naming names, like, they would have to stand up a brand new environment of this legacy provider. They would have to spend literally millions of dollars configuring it. to do the base use case of what Focal Point does. And it's not that complicated, right? It's ask a bunch of questions, get the right answer, and get directed to the right spot. It doesn't sound that hard, right? And yes,
Right.
you do it in some of these legacy solutions? Yeah, you probably can. Should you do it? Maybe not. How long will it take and what will it cost? I think, you have to sort of, again, procurement, you have to start with requirements, right? And then figuring out what the right solution is. And just because, you have something that looks like a hammer or like a nail, doesn't mean you should always use it.
Sure.
100%.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So let's move on to question 5. Of course, this is important. So what KPIs, key performance indicators, should organizations track to measure the effectiveness of their procurement intake process?
Anders, you want to go first on that one? So I took the last one. Oh, you're on mute. Anders, you're on mute.
So, yeah, so I kind of go back to the days of when I was working at a large organization that had a very large call center, right? And we always track something called first call resolution, right? If the customer has to come back and call you twice, that's a failure, right? So at the end of the day, I think the biggest performance metric is what percentage of self-service is happening where you don't have to get engaged, where the customer gets what they need the first time around. And, there's a great book called The Best Service is No Service, right? Where basically, the people can take care of what they need to do by themselves. And I think that is ultimately the fantastic KPI. The second thing I would add, and we do this quite a bit, we track net promoter scores. So how happy are people with the experience that procurement just put them through, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is also a key indicator, right? So I call that efficiency and then effectiveness, right? Like, can they get to where they need to go? Can they get their demands met? And are they happy about it?
Yeah. I'll add a couple more to that because those are wonderful. The couple that I was thinking of was almost like a cycle time, right? So we hear a lot about procurement being a black hole, that stuff goes in and it takes a long time for it to come out. So how are we measuring the cycle time of the items that are coming into our queues and we're managing through intake? Are we more effective at completing those activities because now we have visibility, assignment, and recognition of how we're balancing our resources? So I think that cycle time is important. And then I think there's also another indicator, and this might be a sub of one of yours, Anders, is how many people are coming into procurement asking for status updates? Like, can we track the reduction in just that alone to help increase your net promoter score? I think would be a huge benefit for procurement if end users could just, or anyone that's requesting assistance from procurement could see the status of what's going on versus having to pick up the call Jane or email Jane in procurement.
And I'll sort of add on to that, right? Some of the things that we run into is the whole idea of quantifying benefits, right? And reducing cycle times, for example, is one of those things. But since there are no effective methods of tracking cycle times today, you're comparing yourself to something that is not measured in the front end of the process, right? So when you don't know what the baseline is, it's hard to actually measure the outcome of an effective process. So I would challenge you to sort of say, well, how am I tracking CSAT today, or how am I tracking cycle times today? Because you're probably not.
Yeah.
And
maybe that's a reason why to get intake, right? I mean, that we aren't measuring it today is a problem. And that's maybe what's leading to some of the bad PR that we get out there from our stakeholders about the black holes, is that we don't know how to market that effectively. We're not managing it. We're not measuring it. So that is a huge, probably business case for getting something like intake.
Awesome. All right. Thank you both. That's perfect. So that takes us into our next question. So talking a little bit about how often an organization should review and revise its intake process. I think this kind of piggybacks well off of some of the things we're talking about, but even with, the AI question, so there are these very new topics that keep popping up. How often and how most effectively should intake be revised and reviewed?
So
go ahead.
I'm going to start by challenging that. I think probably a lot of organizations don't know what they have today. Right. So to my earlier question, if you stand back and really take a look at how your procurement organization is functioning today and all of the different areas where you could have an input into the process, there's probably several different ways to get in contact with procurement today. A lot more than probably people think. So I would challenge to say, let's start with understanding what you're currently doing today and what challenge that is to the organization, not only to your end users, but also to the management of the work that's going on in your team. Then to me, it's always continuous improvement. You should have, once you define it, this should be a continual effort to revise and learn and be agile as the organization continues to change. Because remember, I mean, we're facilitating an organization to be successful, and that organization is in constant motion. So this would be a whatever intake you decide to do, it should be easy to design and configure and update as your organization continues to move. So Anders, go.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, I think you hit the nail on the head, Sarah. Sorry, Amanda. I think at the end of the day, you know, we need to continuously improve, right? It seems to me like procurement is always transforming. Every time a new leader comes in, they transform the organization, and it's exhausting, right? So I'm going to take the old process, rip it out, replace it, and then I'm going to put new tech and rip it out, replace it, and now I'm done. Like now we're awesome, right? But I think ultimately, like, it's not a set it and forget it type of thing. You need to constantly come back and say, all right, what incremental changes can I do to make this successful? And I think a lot of time and money and a ton of effort has been spent replacing products, replacing software that doesn't need to be replaced, right? It can be incrementally enhanced. You can rethink how you implemented something in the past. Like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And just make sure that the tools you have work for you in the best way. And I think if we think about it that way, you don't need to have these Herculean efforts to go through change management every single time a new leader comes in. I think that's the important part. Like, make sure that it's a continuous improvement process rather than a transformation. I think we could do with some of that.
Yeah, we could. And I heard a stat. I think the average CPO right now, the tenure of a CPO is like just under 3 years. So it's like 2.8 years or something like that. So yeah, if we're doing a transformation every 3 years, that gets pretty tiresome. And I've been one of those leaders. I'll admit it, that was basically what I did in my corporate career. But there are such solutions out there today where it doesn't take a transformation. It takes thoughtfulness and continuous improvement and a willingness to understand that customer journey, and you can make such an impact.
But I also think, again, we're a software company, so I'm going to sort of speak ill about a software company, but software companies also need to come to the table to say, look, we didn't get implemented correctly the first time around. Can you please help us so that we can, get the best use of your solution? I think part of the problem is us. Like, we sort of would have the customer on auto renew and just keep rolling, and it doesn't always work for the customer. And sometimes that's why we rip things out.
Yeah, well, and that's a large part of what we do at Wonder Services is we go in after the fact and help optimize the solutions because, and Anders, you probably feel the exact same way, but part of the reason why I got into this is because we were finally getting money in procurement. Like when I started, we never saw a dime. It was like, yeah, procurement. But we were starting to get investment, and then we implement these solutions and they're like half-baked.
Yep.
And I do put that a lot on implementation teams in general, SIs and the tech, because they're so focused on just getting the tech up and running that they forget about the user experience and the effectiveness of the tool long term. Getting a tech up and running is not the hard part.
Sure. Yeah. That was a little bit of a trick question. That led down into the road of doing all this thoughtfully, which I think are really, really good answers. Yeah, I think that was a really good message in chat too, of experience working with companies that undervalue investing in procurement
Yes.
organization as well. And I think that's true. As you do finally start to get money, you do start to get that investment. It's critical that the tools that are implemented thoughtfully and effectively.
Yes.
For sure. Okay, well, that takes us to question 7. Of course, we had to put a question about AI. It wouldn't be 2023 if we didn't. So how do you see the future of procurement intake evolving with the rise of technologies like AI, blockchain, or do you at all?
Go for it, Amanda.
Okay. So I think they're going to play really nicely together in the same sandbox. And the reason why I say that is AI, look, I'll give you an example from last night. So my daughter, my 13-year-old, just gets done with dance. It's like 9 o'clock at night and she's crying because she has a paper to write and it's due today. And she was starting to work on it last night. We used chat to help her think of, like, they gave her a list of different topics to write about. She used the chat GPT to find sources of, so she could go research different companies that do this type of research. And it completely accelerated her ability to write the paper last night. I did not let her use it to write the paper, but it was an input to being able to accelerate what we do in a very agile and thoughtful way. So I use that story because I think AI is going to do the same thing. People in organizations, as organizations continue to develop AI, there's going to be this thought process around having really insights at your fingertips. No longer are people going to be able and willing and wanting to have to hand stuff off to another organization without having the visibility to what that status is. AI is going to drive a lot of that behavior. And so that's why I said in my earlier comments, if you're not thinking about intake, you're going to have a gap in your ability to serve your stakeholders, because your stakeholders are going to, even beyond today, grow to demand that type of interaction from procurement, mostly because of their experience with AI. So I cannot stress that enough.
Yeah, I agree. So I mean, AI and machine learning and all those things, they basically are taking the grueling amount of work out of the equation, right? You can get a lot of work done with very little effort, so to speak. And I think any technology will take, will be utilizing AI to some extent to get rid of and automate some of the most grueling tasks that you do. Mm-hmm. But I think procurement technology is no different than that. And we need to make sure that we look at all of these things in unison and talk about the outcome we're looking to achieve. And that's ultimately the better customer experience, effective and efficient tools and tactics and processes. And everybody will be looking at that in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So I think, AI and those kinds of things will only make the processes better.
Yeah. And
including intake.
And easier to implement. Like when you think about AI is not this like end-to-end solution, right? AI is really focused on, I have a specific business problem that I am going to solve for, and I am going to build it and train the AI and the machine learning, the LLM models to learn my business. And because of that, it's a very spot solution kind of thing. And we're going to be able to move faster. So that it's going to be a huge shift in how we approach these projects and how we think through implementation timelines, et cetera.
Absolutely. And yeah. Jennifer, I love what you put in chat too. I just wanted to read it and see if you guys had any to add, but I agree AI will be powerful. The challenge I see is the control from a company perspective on either one, have a private AI environment, which will not yield the full benefits of AI because it's obviously not accessing the entirety of all the knowledge it could, or 2, ensuring the privacy and confidentiality of what we input is controlled. So I do think that's definitely always a good question. Yeah. So I can, it's funny when you talk about AI these days, because by the time that we email out this webinar as a recording, it's already obsolete. Right. It's moving so fast.
But it's interesting to me, there are building tools that, like, if you can take an LLM that is fully built today, put it behind your firewall, protect you from the data and privacy concerns, and continue to train that LLM model on what is needed for your business, right? You can do that today very, very inexpensively. So that is, to me, like a huge benefit to procurement. Like, you could do that today and create a chat bot that can answer questions that are coming into your teams today. Now, the evolution of this is there is an expectation that there is going to be kind of almost like a hybrid approach to this, where you're going to still be able to get updates to that LLM from the outside, but still have it protected and trained for what you need. So it's going to be interesting, Jennifer, how this all plays out. I've been diving in real hard on this lately. We're doing actually a series of articles and different things coming out over the next couple of weeks related to AI for procurement. But today, I think there's such an advantage to be looking at those LLM solutions, putting it behind your firewall and training it on what you need to do. And then that it's going to continue to evolve from there.
Awesome, Amanda. I love that. And I actually learned something new today too. So definitely be keeping an eye out for the AI series, and y'all should too. If you don't follow us and Wonder Services on LinkedIn, definitely get over there, because I'm excited to read that. But that is actually the last of our pre-submitted questions, I believe. And now we can kind of have a live Q&A. I don't know if anybody else had any more questions or anything else they wanted to add, or if there's anything else you guys wanted to chat about.
Yeah, and feel free to ask away. Actually, last time Anders and I did this, people just started asking all kinds of questions that are on your mind for procurement. Doesn't necessarily have to be related to intake. We're the lucky part about Anders and what I do is that we get to talk to a lot of people in procurement every single day. So we have a pretty good view on the challenges and concerns that are going on.
Awesome. And I just did want to say, Jennifer said, I agree, Amanda, it's the legal obstacle in cybersecurity that needs to be convinced. Absolutely. There is a big lift there.
Yes, 100%.
Awesome. Okay. And if anybody else does have questions, I'll check the Q&A too. Please feel free to share them now, or any thoughts too. We're happy to discuss further, but we'll hang around a little bit just to see if we get anything.
Can I pull on a little bit? There was a comment in here about I've experienced working with companies that undervalued investing in procurement. So I guess, Anders, you sell into procurement organizations all the time, and they need to put together a business case. Do you have any advice for people who are struggling to get investment in procurement, and how they can maybe get a yes on an approval on a business case moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we are not speaking up for ourselves. We're not being our best advocates, right? And I think the complexity of what we do and the value of what we do, is often understated. So I would sort of challenge procurement people to look at totality of procurement, whether that is mitigating risks through doing the process right, managing our accounts payable for better payment terms, and maximizing our cash flow, or the customer satisfaction issue. Like, what is the risk of somebody bypassing procurement altogether because the process is difficult? I think that is how you start out with it. But ultimately, we as procurement professionals, I think the average is like 5x return on procurement investments. And that is not even including the risk mitigation part of it. So really, just document what you do, how you do it, and the value you bring, and you'll be able to get the dollars that you have. And I think a lot of it also depends on where you sit in the organization. So if you're very deeply within corporate real estate or the controller's office, something like that, like, these folks might not necessarily be the best advocates for you, because their day jobs is very tactical in my point of view, right? Whereas procurement is a transformational function.
Yeah. Anders, I think you do a really good job at this around telling the story of the evolution of procurement. So whenever I recommend people who, like my clients who are going to try to get a business case over the hurdle, I always like to say, you need to tell a story. We so often in procurement, I'm the same way. I like to look at numbers. I like to have the facts and all that. which you'll still do, but there are people in the room that get more motivated emotionally by a story. And you tell such a great story about where we've been and where we're going. I don't know if you could just share that really quickly, and then we have another question that came up in the chat.
Sure. So when I started in procurement, Larry, long time ago, it was all about saving money, right? So we were basically coming into corporate procurement, like not direct procurement, but corporate procurement. And we were sourcing for cost savings, right? It was very, very awesome because it was easy to do. So you took large categories of spend, wrote down the requirements, bid it out, and you saved gobs of cash, right? Then Enron happened, and Sarbanes-Oxley came in. We had the supplier failures that really brought down companies. And all of a sudden, a few things happened, right? Like, number one, procurement was not optional anymore. People had to use procurement because we had to take them through a risk process. We had to make sure things were done properly. The companies that we were doing business with were secure and all that kind of things, right? So now it went from save the company money to save the company, right? Save the company money while saving the company from bad actors and making sure that, you have ironclad contracts with, security and all that other good stuff. And, because of procurement wasn't optional anymore, like the gates of hell opened up, right? So all of a sudden you got all of these things that were coming your way that you weren't really accounting for. And of course, you didn't get, the equivalent amount of bodies to go with it. So usually now procurement gets buried into the non-value added stuff, right? They just became a process function, right? And now in 2023, as we're sitting here, not only do we need to save the company money and we need to save the company, we also need to save the world, right? Because now we have to make sure that we are measuring carbon footprint. We got to make sure that we're measuring single-use plastics. We got to make sure that we are doing business with people that are diverse. We got to make sure that we do business with people that have ethical business practices. And ultimately, it's becoming more and more complex. And we have point solutions for all of these disparate things, and it slows us down significantly. So, for example, if you need to leave your sourcing tool to go to a website to find diverse suppliers, then transpose that data back into the sourcing tool, and then keep on your merry way. It's becoming overly complex, and that's essentially why I created Focal Point, so that we can automate a lot of these things and put everything on system, so that you don't go all over Hell's Acres looking for information that you can get at your fingertips elsewhere.
So Anders, I love that story. And this is, I wanted you to share it because I think it's so impactful for anyone that's going on a journey of asking for investment into procurement, just to be able to describe that arc of our history. It's so impactful. I've actually used it, referencing you that you use it, but I've used it with some of my clients, and they loved that story. So it's such a great way to put it. And we're getting some additional questions coming in. Maya, do you want to take?
If we could sort through these really quick, because we're getting a lot of really, really good stuff. So I didn't want to skip over your last thing, Jennifer. You said if anyone has a template for a benefit presentation, I think it's the same question that Larry just sent, which I really love this. Procurement folks aren't very good at advocating for themselves. I almost think they need 2 to 3 templated advocacy slides where they can plug in 3 to 6 values and let it fly, which I think is so cool. I think that'd be such a good thing to send out, be like, here you guys go. Here's a gift.
Yeah.
Go ask for what you want and just make it super easy. So I've definitely written that down in my book of things, because I think that's a really great idea. But we do also have a couple of other questions. Wade sent over, what other systems does an intake solution typically integrate with? ERP, S2P, CRM, BI, other. Anders, you can probably speak to that.
Yeah, I sure can. So the answer to that is yes to all of them, right? So I think, the integrations is one thing, right? Like, you can say we're integrated, but that can mean you move one piece of data to another, from one system to another. That is integration, technically speaking. So I think as we're talking about integration, it's important to sort of define what that means to you. So one of the things that we do is we integrate deeply, so that as someone is coming into the front door of procurement at Focal Point and say, I'm looking for XYZ, I'm looking for someone to do, I don't know, I'm looking for IT hardware desktops. Great. We then basically query the databases of that supplier and say, great, here are your desktop providers. Do you want to use any of these? right? And that is it's a much deeper integration than basically just moving, transferring you from one system to the next, right? So I think, I think an intake solution needs to integrate deeply with an ERP. It needs to integrate deeply with a source to pay, but it also needs to sort of move work around so that, basically you can move your projects from left to right without having to sort of log into a whole bunch of different systems. And we actually do have a customer who has integrated us with CRM for their sell side contracts. And then we integrated with their source to pay solution for their buy side contracts. And we actually linked them for the first time together, saying you have these sell side contracts that are serviced by these service providers within your company. And I think that is ultimately like the holy grail, right? Because now you're tying things together that typically weren't tied together before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good, answer. We did get another anonymous question through Q&A that I sent in the chat just so everyone could see it. It reads, any thoughts/tips on how to transition from a role procurement organization that doesn't invest in procurement tech into a role where there is better investment in the procurement organization and the skills of purchasers? I will say this kind of goes back to this question that's come up a lot, which is how to advocate for yourself. Like, you've been given, like a kid, you've been given $100 on Christmas and now you can't decide where you even want to spend it. Like, what's most important? So let's have a little chat about that. I think it's a good thing to drill into.
So I'll take this one at first. I'm going to answer the specific question, then I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So for the specific question, what I would recommend if you are looking to change organizations to one that is investing in procurement, I would get out on LinkedIn and do some research on organizations that have been talking about it, right? So you have leaders out there that are talking about their transformations, that they're promoting what they're doing within their organizations. And you can quickly find those leaders who are taking a moment to invest in procure tech. So it's what I'm saying is it's not hard to find. Then once you find it, then it's really just keeping up with those organizations, seeing if they have openings that you could apply for and making connections within those organizations as much as possible. I've even had a friend who just shows interest, right? So she wanted to make a transition. She found the handful of organizations that seem to be investing in the places that she wants to be working in. And she just started reaching out saying, hey, I see that you don't have any positions for me now, but I'm highly interested in coming over to your organization in the future and start building those relationships. So that's the very kind of like specific answer to your question. But backtracking from there, I think one of the problems, at least I've noticed in procurement, is our inability to market ourselves and to sell ourselves. So it's a lot easier to sell if you've been marketing. And a good marketer, and Maya knows this, it's less about you and it's more about the other areas of the organization. And I like to tell the story is, if Anders walks into the CFO's office today and says, I need more people because I need to do this and I need to do that and I need to do this, it's not going to go over very well. But if you go into the CFO's office, Anders walks in and says, you need this, Mr. or Mrs. CFO, because we need to accomplish this as an organization, or you need to accomplish this because you've committed to the street, then the light bulbs start going off. Mm-hmm. But that's the sell. The marketing has to happen first. You need to be talking about the value that you're adding and how you've been doing things, and truly market so that when you go into the CFO's office, you can do the sale. So, Anders, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I would sort of echo that, but also add, like, I think ultimately companies that are progressive and have progressive goals, like we want to manage our diverse population, and we want to manage our diverse spend, we want to do well with ESG, they can't do any of those things without good procurement organizations, because guess what? We're crucial to making that happen. When scope 3 becomes important, procurement is going to become important. And guess what? It's not that far off. Right. So I think, you can look for companies that do good and they probably invest in procurement function, and just talk to the leaders. Like, we're procurement people. We love talking about what we do, right? We love having people listen to what we say. So reach out to procurement leaders. They're very, and by that I mean people, not the company. But reach out to procurement leaders and say, hey, can I just have a discussion with you about X, Y, Z? How do you think about this? How do you think about that? You probably get a response.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I really love this conversation. I think it's super exciting. I think we're at an exciting point in procurement, and I feel excited because I feel like we already have the topic for our next webinar, which is how, I don't know if it's how to market, it's a working title, how to advocate for yourself in procurement, but I think this is a really cool conversation and I appreciate everyone bringing this up.
Yeah.
Super cool. So thank you so much for those answers. You guys have you fielded all your questions. If y'all have anything else come up, always, we're happy to continue this conversation over on LinkedIn. So feel free to head over and share what you guys think. We will be emailing out a recording of this webinar. So if you think you have a coworker you'd love to share it with, feel free. Or if you want to rewatch, feel free. But thank you all so much for attending today. We appreciate that so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you to Amanda and to Anders for chatting with us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
For listening in.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.